Right, so Israel have committed a world first when it comes to depravity during warfare. An act without any previous precedent at a time when you'd think this is probably the stupidest of times to do such a thing as this, something so heinous. But such is the insanity of the Netanyahu regime, it's happened now anyway. Not even during the two world wars, nor at any other time in history, has a nation deliberately bombed the embassy of another country. Yet that is exactly what Israel have now done by targeting the Iranian embassy in Syria. You'd figure that currently being engaged in genocide in Gaza and taking potshots at Lebanon and Syria itself would be keeping Israel busy enough, but it's not enough apparently. Netanyahu wants to draw the West into this conflict and appears intent on starting as many wars as it needs to on as many fronts as possible to achieve that. Zionism is leading us into World War III by the look of it, and we won't be deviating from that path until the West starts cutting off Israel and leaving it to deal with the ramifications of its actions, facing up to them for once instead of always being protected no matter how badly that spoilt brat of a government behaves. Right, so the Iranian embassy in Syria has been bombed by Israel. This took place yesterday afternoon, our time, at time of writing, with 7 members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, having been killed. This is an historical precedent, as I said a moment ago. This has never happened before. No nation has ever sunk so low, not during 2 world wars, not at any other time in history, has a state deliberately targeted a foreign embassy in another country. The only instance previously that is comparable was from 1999, when NATO bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in the former Yugoslavia, and the US apologised profusely for striking it in error. The US were the responsible party in that instance. They compensated families they paid to have the embassy rebuilt. China dispute the accidental nature of the strike to this day, but it was never proven to be deliberate. But this strike on Iran by Israel was. It shows just how absolutely insane and unhinged the Israeli regime of Netanyahu now is, how far he's prepared to go for his own ends. It's no secret why they've done this either, really. It doesn't take an expert in global international relations to work it out. Israel feels it is untouchable. It knows the West believes it has to be supported and protected in their interests. So in theory, they will never allow Israel to fall. And so now, Israel wants to draw the West into a conflict that's got too big for it, to protect their pathetic backsides as they point at everyone around them being mean to them, despite them having cast the first stone each time. The genocide in Gaza has turned into a public relations disaster for Israel, going from a nation globally sympathised with, thanks to misleading media and anti-Semitic attacks on anyone who did dare to call them out, to the reality being broadcast across social media for months now, Israel becoming a pariah state and the Israeli government being compared to Nazis in their genocidal intent, a view backed up now by that plausible case for genocide being upheld at the International Court of Justice. As Israel attacked Gaza on the premise of going after Hamas, we have 32,000 innocent people dead now, mainly women and children, showing this to be the most barbaric of all of Israel's lies. They were also attacking Lebanon, and they've been at war at Syria for as long as they have existed. These attacks increasingly, seemingly in line with Netanyahu's desperation, ignoring the ICJ, ignoring that recent ceasefire resolution passing, but which saw the West, weakly, stand against Israel, with the UK supporting that resolution finally, and the US allowing it through by abstaining. This attack on Iran now, embassies being sovereign territory of the state that owns them, regardless of which country they're in, seems to be a bit of a "how dare you oppose me, fall into line and protect us" statement from Israel to the US and others, because making an aggressive move against a much more powerful Middle Eastern nation like Iran, the powerhouse nation arguably of the Middle East, the backers of the Houthis in Yemen, lest we forget about that as a for instance. Their response and that of others has been made clear in Al Jazeera's coverage here. Iran's ambassador to Syria, Hossein Akbari, who was not injured in the attack, said Tehran's response would be decisive. Iran's foreign minister Hossein Amiradolahan had described the attack as a violation of all international obligations and conventions and blamed Israel. In a separate statement, Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Nasser Kanani said that Iran reserves the right to carry out a reaction and will decide on the type of response and the punishment of the aggressor. Iran's mission to the United Nations said the strike was a flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter international law and the foundational principle of the inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises. Saying the strike was a significant threat to regional peace and security, the Iranian mission urged the UN Security Council to condemn this attack and said Tehran reserved the right to take a decisive response. Protesters took to the streets of Tehran to condemn Israel over the attack. Syria said innocents had been killed in the strike. We strongly condemn this atrocious terrorist attack that targeted the Iranian consulate building in Damascus and killed a number of innocents, said Syrian Foreign Minister Faisal Mekdad, who visited the scene of the attack along with Syria's Interior Minister. Russia, an ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, also joined the condemnation. We strongly condemn this unacceptable attack against the Iranian consular mission in Syria, Russia's foreign ministry said in a statement. Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah group warned that Israel would pay for the attack. Hezbollah has exchanged near daily cross-border fire with Israel in support of its ally Hamas since the Gaza war erupted in October. Certainly this crime will not pass without the enemy receiving punishment and revenge, Hezbollah said in a statement on Tuesday. It added that Zahedi was one of the first to support, sacrifice and persevere for many years to develop and advance the work of the resistance Hezbollah in Lebanon. Muslim countries including Iraq, Jordan, Oman, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates also condemned the attack. In the United States, meanwhile, State Department spokesman Matthew Miller told reporters that Washington remained concerned about anything that would be escalatory or cause an increase in conflict in the region. When asked about the attack, an Israeli military spokesperson told journalists, "We do not comment on reports in the foreign media." The New York Times cited 4 unnamed Israeli officials as acknowledging that Israel was responsible for the attack. That's an awful lot of Middle Eastern nations lining up to accuse Israel of perpetrating this attack, isn't it? Plus Russia, let's not forget them. But that's the point, isn't it? Drag even more nations into this conflict. The New York Times saying they have unnamed officials claiming it was Israel is backed up by a tweet that's been put out by the Syrian Ministry of Defense, which gives more detail on the circumstances leading up to that embassy strike, saying, around 5 p.m. this afternoon, the Israeli enemy launched an aerial aggression from the direction of the occupied Syrian Golan, targeting the Iranian consulate building in Damascus. Our air defences confronted the enemy's missiles, downed some of them. The aggression resulted in the complete destruction of the building and the martyrdom and injury of everyone inside. Efforts are underway to recover the bodies of the martyrs, provide aid to the wounded, and remove the debris. For months, people have been referring to Israel as a terrorist state. Well, here you have an unprecedented example of that terrorism. It's a terrorist act to hit a consulate like this. Never been done before. No one's ever stooped so low to such an act of terrorism. A terrorist state that the West keeps trying to protect, no less, to shield, but at what cost? Because it's a cost already measured in tens of thousands of innocent lives, but still not a price high enough, it seems, for the West to do what is right. It's a cost that's seen virtually the complete destruction of the ability to exist, to live in Gaza. The bulk of the population are now cornered in Rafah. The largest hospital, Al-Shifa, has now been utterly destroyed. War already on 3 fronts, and now Israel decided to make it 4 by attacking Iran. Still, the US appears set on protecting Israel. More arms on the way to them, despite the ceasefire. Clearly, Israel want Western-backed military support now, and who's to say they won't get it? This attack is designed to drag more Western nations into this conflict. How big is this thing going to get before people and nations finally say no to Netanyahu and tell him the bed he's made for himself, he can go and lie in it? Whatever happens to Israel next, as Iran swear repercussions is all on them. They do want the UN Security Council involved and to deal with this, but you can imagine if they don't get some kind of a satisfactory response there, and given how long it's taken to get this ceasefire, let's not get too high an idea about that, they will then take matters into their own hands. And of course all of this follows on from an Israeli strike against UN peacekeepers in Lebanon the other day. The UN's own people again hit. And where is the outcry from them? What are they going to do about that? People in UNIFIL. This should have been the airstrike that exposed Israel for good, and yet we're still waiting so that another airstrike against Iran has now been carried out. Sitting out is not an option here. The UN continuing to do so is unforgivable, but they keep seeming to get their hands tied by certain nations with too much power, and will carry accusations of their weakness again if still nothing gets done. The details of that Lebanon strike can be found here on this video recommendation. and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.